Well, I'm honored, absolutely honored to be at the last day of this fantastic platform, the World Government Summit. I had initially a beautiful sunny day. The weather kind of changed. It prepares you very well for Brussels.
Absolutely.
But I mean, it's a nice day anyways. I would like to start immediately with this. A most essential pillar of government communication is crisis communication. And taking this forward, tackling crisis, especially from someone who comes from Dubai, we're used to tackling it just before the flames go up. We anticipate. And that's part of the learning that we've done here in Dubai. And I'm fortunate to be part of this communication expertise kind of platform. And the good old days, I remember when we had the luxury of waiting, sitting with my parents for the 8 o'clock news, knowing that the statement is going to come from 3 of my favorite anchors, and that was it. And as we go forward with the evolving digital world, this is not the case anymore. And today I want to discuss that with you. And I want to emphasize on some certain pillars that I think personally will never change. Again, talking about the government of Dubai, whether there is digital, whether there is evolving of social media, there's one thing that would never change, is organizational behavior. And we've learned that, and I see some stakeholders around us, we've learned that with having the right partners, stakeholders in a crisis situation, it is important. Hierarchies completely dissolve. It is just the focus on getting the problem solved and anticipating and scenario planning for what's coming up. And definitely a couple of things that we keep in mind: speed, and that will never change. It will actually progress as the digital world evolves. Transparency, and we heard that around the government with everything, whether it was AI or the discussion of the future. And also, misinformation is something we need to keep in mind. And that is the common question that everybody's talking about. Will it change with artificial intelligence involvement? And also, I always insist, and I speak to my colleagues and my friends about the audience. I speak to people in Brussels, I speak to people in Spain, in Bahrain, UK, and it's different. You need to understand who your audience is to transmit the right key messages, to make sure you're using the right connotations. And I will close that down by remembering, and this is something my boss keeps telling me, in 2009, we felt we were going through certain things, and this is where Dubai started even succeeding more, because we started learning from mistakes. And learning from mistakes is more success. So I'm going to start by introductions, and I'm going to start with you. Today we have Nancy Jamal, 2018. She was the official coalition representative for the Global Coalition Against Daesh. Do I need to say more? Really? I mean, the title says it all, right? And she also holds a diplomatic rank of Minister at the Kingdom of Bahrain's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And personally, I need to thank someone, and she's not here today, a colleague of mine, Rima Ktate. She made that introduction at that beautiful summer day in London. We sipped tea in Café Royal, as I remember. That was it, right? So I'm really happy to have seen you.
Thank you.
I'm going to move to President Verbeke. A lot of people around this room know him because we met him in Brussels. He obtained a degree in law from Yale Law School, after which he had a dense diplomatic career, all the way from the region, from Beirut to Amman, Central Africa, Santiago, Chile, NYC, one of my favorite cities, and now ambassador in Egmont Palace in Brussels, where we met. And I have to say, you were my first host in Brussels. And this is where I liked Brussels. And we managed to see you twice that year. So I'm glad to have you in Dubai. Welcome. I left you till the end. Last but not least, His Excellency Bernardino Leon, first president of the Emirates Diplomatic Academy, proud cohort #1 graduate. And of course, for people who don't know you, you've served as the United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General to Libya, active role in the Israeli and Palestinian Civil Society Geneva Agreements. Also, I call you, like, your middle name is definitely peacemaking. Now, on a personal note, I could now call you a mentor, if you would allow me. And people questioned me when I entered, when Her Excellency Munal Meri said, you need to go to the Emirates Diplomatic Academy. And they said, but you're a communication expert. Are you really eligible for this role? And you said, Noura, a good diplomat is a good communicator. So thank you for that. I'm going to start directly with your question, Nancy. So before I get into my intended question, we had this conversation, and because of your title, we say Daesh coalition, ISIS coalition. So let's clarify that before we dig into the actual question that I want to ask you. Now, I understand that the ideological technique against the Daesh coalition was looked at a successful kind of technique. So we want to talk about that communication aspect. And we want to talk about, was it really successful? And if it is, would you kind of talk to us a bit about that technique?
The coalition, for those that don't know, it's 79 partners, international partners, 74 countries, 5 international agencies. We work across 5 lines of effort. One of them is military, one of them is countering the threat of foreign terrorist fighters, one is counter-financing, one is stabilization of liberated areas, and one of them, which is the one that I've been working on, is the communications line of effort. This is how we counter the terrorist propaganda, prevent it from re-emerging, providing vulnerable communities with their own inner resilience towards any terrorist propaganda that comes back. We've learned a lot throughout this period. We started it in 2014 when the threat first arose. And since then, it's been a learning process. We've been trying to apply different methods of strategic communication to this. We've built networks, international networks, that work on national messaging in line with the coalition's overall messaging. How this is done is basically there's a communications working group that reports to the coalition. Residing over it, the 3 co-chairs are the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and the United Arab Emirates. Together, each of them has built an agency. In the US, it's the Global Engagement Center. In the UAE, it is the Sawab Center and Hidayah. And in the UK, we have the Counter-Daesh Communications Cell. Each of us has a different mandate, but we work towards the same towards the same goal.
But is Daesh an intentional kind of, can we call it a brand for this specific campaign? Did it assist in that communication technique?
So definitely, with the rise of Daesh, Daesh started to use and apply new forms of communications in delivering its message, attracting people online and offline, using the technology, the internet. We've never seen this before. Al-Qaeda, HTS, all the other terrorist organizations throughout this period have been looking and they've been learning and they've been trying to apply these messages and apply the way they conduct their communications. We've also been watching. We've tried to stay ahead of the trend, to work on techniques to counter this, to prevent it, to provide a narrative that will work in the long run, a positive narrative, so to speak. And we've tried to network across the international environment with all the messaging centers that work together towards the same.
Fantastic. So we'll move from Daesh coalition communication techniques to a very different technique that I read. And the word compromise comes in it. And when it comes to us, and I've learned that in Dubai, especially working with the government, nothing is to be compromised. You need to push through. We always say nothing is impossible. And I'll quote you, Ambassador Verbeke. Allow me to quote you saying to compromise is not to fail. And I find it very unique. And it might be different than the diplomatic communication techniques. So I'd like to hear a bit more about that. And if so, when did you compromise and you succeeded? And if I may say, when did you compromise and not succeed much?
Well, indeed, I fully agree that I think compromise is very important. As a matter of fact, there are 2 different issues to be distinguished in that era. The first one is that when you are in a negotiation situation and you are the proponent and you have the other one, which we call, for the sake of unity, the opponent, that you never should push the opponent up to the bottom of the discussion. Always leave a space, a room of, honorability, respectability for your opponent, however much he is the opponent, and however much you are in a position to crush him, to go to the bottom, to go up to the very end of the discussion. Always leave room for him, because you may have to deal with him at a later stage, somewhere in another context. So that's one aspect of compromise, if I may say so. And as a matter of fact, for those who are interested to delve into that, in game theory, there is one model called dictator's game. And the dictator's game tells you exactly how far you can go without going too far and alienating somebody who may be your future partner in another context. So that's one element. The other element of the compromise proper is that in negotiation, as in life generally, I would say, you have to learn to live with the suboptimal. The world at large is suboptimal. It's not optimal. And the failure that many negotiator falls to, the trap into he falls, is that as he is on the right track, he feels self-comfortable and think, I can go further, and I want the optimal solution as I see it for the problem at hand. And very often, the optimal, as we say in French, le meilleur est l'ennemi du bien. The optimal is the enemy of the suboptimal. You should settle for the suboptimal. And as you said, well, one of those quotes that I very often use is, to compromise is not a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it's a sign of wisdom. It's a sign of knowing exactly how to accommodate a difficult situation. And a negotiation situation, by definition, is a difficult situation.
Excellent. I'll move to you, and I will have to start with this. So, during my time in EDA, when I had certain challenges, and I wasn't an easy student, I can say that, and I would want to enter your office, and I ask for a meeting, and I go in, and I know I have my pitch, I have my pain points, I'm ready to negotiate for what I want at that point, my demands as a student, and I go in extremely upset, and there's this aura in the room that instantly calms me down, I have to say. And I leave his room, forgetting what my demands are, extremely happy, thinking, what did I really want? I'm okay now. So if that's not good negotiation, I don't know what is. So I'm gonna jump into something now. I mean, if you negotiated with me and you were able to negotiate with some terrorist groups, and I really wanted to ask you this, and I never had the chance. In specific, with a certain terrorist group, which is the ETA group, I would really like to know about that. And with your experience, Your Excellency, relating that to preempting crisis comms before entering the negotiation table.
Nora, thanks so much for this opportunity. You were a difficult student, and I'm grateful for that, because the best thing in life is to be challenged. Thanks also to Mona, Mari, and all the team at Dubai Media. Now, I'm afraid that the uniqueness, I know we have some representatives from corporate. You can anticipate crisis in corporate, and maybe I'm saying this out of ignorance. I have never worked in the corporate sector, but I think you understand crisis better, and you can anticipate better. What is different in political life is that crises are unique. You're never really prepared for political crisis, because you handle today a crisis in which politicians are accused of being corrupted. And when you think you know how to deal with that, then you have the gilet jaune, the yellow jackets crisis, which is a completely different one. And you are not ready for that, because if you try to use the same codes you used before, it will not work. So the only recipe I think I can tell you from the Spanish perspective is that a team is unfortunately ready when they are used to work with these issues. And I think what makes special the case of Spain in Europe against Belgium, for instance, and other countries, is that unfortunately we had terrorism for a long time. So we still had it alive as a terrorist group. It ended with our government in 2010 when we finally finished that, but it had there for 60 years. Mm-hmm. And we had the first jihadist terrorist attack in 2004. So all the machinery was ready. So if I think the British is another case. They had IRA and then the jihadist terrorism. So based on that, I can tell you, recently we had the last attack. I think everybody in this room will remember the Barcelona attack.
Absolutely.
In the Ramblas in Barcelona. And I could see, because we had this system in which we have the police, the national police in Madrid and the regional police in some regions in Spain. In the case of Barcelona and Catalonia is the Mossos. And I was worried how they are not that used to handle, but many of them were coming from national police. And I think the way they dealt with that crisis, that attack, it showed how keeping the machinery oiled is so important. If you analyze, and I think anyone in this room can go to the official social media of the Mossos de Escuadra, is how the Catalan police is called. And I'm going to say something. They did much better than the national police in Madrid.
Mm-hmm.
So you will see, for instance, the way, first of all, victims is absolutely crucial. Calls for all the media not to use pictures of the victims. You know, the first thing many media will try to do is all these terrible pictures of. So the first thing they did, please respect the victims. And this is very important because immediately the society, you don't have to say, I am the government of Catalonia and I'm taking care of. No, you just ask the people, please, and the media, please respect the victims. And then you are telling them what you care. You care not for you, but for them, for the society. So this was a very powerful message. Then I think they were not, you know, these famous signs they have in UK, keep calm. When they were not telling the people keep calm. They were just showing pictures saying we are in all the railway stations, we are in all the airports, we are in the streets, and the pictures of agents everywhere. We have uniformed and non-uniformed police around. So it was very reassuring, not telling them, but actually showing them. And this was another very powerful way. They took time. And you know, time is the most difficult thing to handle in political crisis, because everything, as you said very rightly, everything accelerates. So this is where you could really see the difference between the Catalans and Madrid. The interior minister in Madrid, the second day, he came to say, damn, we have arrested everyone. And then the very same day, we heard that one of the terrorists managed to escape. So this was devastating for him. Actually, his political career ended that very day. Whereas the Catalan police said, we are still working, trust us, we are still working, and we will find the guy. And yes, 48 hours later, they found the guy, and as you probably remember, he was killed by the police in a little village in northern Catalonia. So he was trying to escape to France. And so taking time, managing time is absolutely crucial. And showing the people, if you have to tell them there is still one guy missing, it's okay, it's fine. Just take your time. Don't try to respond to this time pressure in the wrong way. I think they did also very well from a diplomatic perspective, communicating in 4 languages at the same time. And this is not easy, but you need to have your teams prepared because everything is global today. Nothing is local anymore. There you have this crisis in Catalonia, and people in Indonesia are trying to find out what's the latest about the Barcelona attack. So they were communicating simultaneously in Catalan, in Spanish, in English, and in French. Again, you can go to the social media and see how their messages. They handle very well the social media. They handle very well different media, and they adapted very well to the different formats. So the classic ones, TV, radio, etc., but also Facebook and Twitter, and they did very well because every platform is different. And I think it's very important. They were very humble, and they showed gratitude. Whenever people were giving them information, they were responding. So they were not saying we did this very well because we're very good. They were humble, and I think people, these are the kind of feelings I think people have to feel, and the only way to anticipate, I think, is to try to learn for the people who unfortunately are dealing with this kind of crisis every week, every month. That's the only way.
Excellent. So from empathy to humbleness and communication strategies to post-Daesh, and you speak about stabilization a lot. And I really want to hear about that. And we want to speak about what are we doing, what are some of the practices and some of the strategies, obviously the ones that you can speak about.
So now that we've entered the phase of stabilization, it's very important to communicate what is going on, which is how we use public-facing campaigns to keep the narrative alive and keep people united and in the know of what's being achieved and what's going on ground. But also within the liberated areas, we need to give a message of hope, to show what is being done so that you sort of build this inner ability. People want to remain, IDPs want to return. And so far we've been quite successful because till today we have about 4.2 million Iraqi IDPs have returned to stabilized, liberated areas. One of the campaigns that has proved quite successful is the Life After Daesh campaign. And if you go onto Twitter or Facebook or other social media platforms and you hashtag Life After Daesh, you can see examples of this. Now, what this was basically, we bring in case studies on ground from these liberated areas, from a child playing football that used to go to Daesh schools and used to have to play with guns, and now he's playing football with his classmates, he's smelling flowers, very simple things that take him away from the violent landscape that he was in. Someone who's opened a bakery, someone who had the ability to deliver a child in hospital after liberation, after stabilization. You're just bringing real life examples to show what life really is like in these liberated areas after stabilization. And it sort of just builds a message of hope. It also allows the region, publics in the region, to know what is going on just across the border, what is happening to their brethren. There's a lot of disinformation. This is the age of disinformation. There are different interest groups that want to give a negative message. There are also Daesh, other terrorist organizations want to give a negative message that it was much better at the time of the so-called caliphate, so that people want to go back, they break that resilience. So these are the types of campaigns that do go on.
Excellent. I'll move to you, Ambassador Verbeke. And we had a chat over dinner, and I know you're a great storyteller, and you've shared with me a couple of nice stories. But in specific, we would like to go to the not very nice stories. And a time where you had to deal with crisis. Crisis on your time when you were somewhere around the world, and you can make that choice. And we would like to hear a bit about that story and some of the reactions, especially also from a crisis comes perspective. And remembering that I'm not sure when that time was. So was there social media at that time or not? We would like to hear that too.
Yeah, well, these are slightly two different questions. The timing question, what was it to be a spokesperson of the ministry 30 years ago, and what is it today? But then the crisis question, how do you handle the crisis? And perhaps I'll take the second one first. Yeah, sure. I think a diplomat, one of the definitions of a diplomat is that he's a kind of crisis manager. He's being paid to solve crisis, to overcome whatever misunderstandings there are. And I personally have went through a couple of them, which basically, we are a little bit cynical in diplomatic life, but the more difficult the situation is, the more of kind we have the adrenaline going up. And one of them was when there was a coup d'etat in Burundi, where I was being posted in Central Africa. Another one was in the office of my minister, our chef de cabinet, the minister at the time. And we happened to have delivered weapons, highly sophisticated weapons, to Nepal that came out because the police had been used using these weapons against a kind of local event. And then we were being said, how is it possible that a country like Belgium brings those weapons to Nepal? This was really a day of survival for the minister or not. Everything happened within those 12 hours. So that is another critical situation.
Were you the spokesperson at that time?
I was his chef de cabinet, his, chief of staff, as you say here. Another, and of course now I come closer to what Leon just was telling about, was a very critical situation in Brussels at the time of the terrorist attacks in the spring of 16. And let's focus a little bit. Well, I won't focus on any of them. What I can say is that as a pattern, out of those different critical situations, I always found three things. First, your information is incomplete. By definition, a crisis is something which is sudden and dramatic. And your information is incomplete information. So you have to act on incomplete knowledge. There is a whole science about that. Inductive logic, probability theory, but as a diplomat, I can tell you, within the few hours you have to address the issue, you are not going to consult your probability course to see what to do. So you have to act on incomplete knowledge as far as the facts are concerned. The second point is what is sudden, what is eventful, what is dramatic, automatically lends itself to over-dramatization, to exaggeration, to sentimentalization, to emotionalization. That is well known by the behavioral economists. And as a matter of fact, Kahneman was here yesterday. He is one of those guys who have identified the different cognitive traps. And one of the cognitive traps is the awareness trap. That is, you read something, you see something on television at 6 a.m. in the morning, and you think that the whole world agenda is just that one single event. So there is a tendency to dramatize and over-dramatize. And the third point that you have is the kind of interpretation that they give to the event, the kind of extrapolation. Out of that single event, they start making a big story about your country. The mudslides in Brazil equates failed state. What happened in my country, just on dramatization, when we had those terrorist attacks, the big question, the big titles were, Belgium finds itself back in World War II. You can just imagine that, how far imagination stretches. Now, what do you have to do as a diplomat, as a communicator, because for that matter, there is nothing specifically in a diplomat to answer, except for the fact that the issue at stake has an international dimension. At the time of the terrorist attacks, as a matter of fact, I was posted in Washington, so I had to address that question very early. As a matter of fact, a little anecdote, if I can. I was traveling from Brussels to Washington that very night, when early in the morning in Brussels, the attacks took place at 7 a.m. in Brussels. 7 less 6 hours difference is 1 a.m. in Washington. I was flying in, and as I could not rest, I said, let's go to the embassy. So I got there at 3:30 at the embassy, which is not the normal hour to start your day. And I saw a little camionette standing there with a kind of parabola. And I said, those guys are working early at the electricity repair. Mm-hmm. But there was a lady standing there. I stepped out of my car, a lady, and she said, Ambassador, my condolences. I said, look, something happened, which I am not aware about. So at once I said, yes, indeed, and that's the reason why I got that early to the embassy, to check the facts and figures. Now, what do you have to do? And I join very much what Leon said. On the facts and figures, always stand on solid ground. Never use a figure in terms of number of victims that is not a figure that you really know is the case.
So the incomplete information, as you said. The incomplete information.
That's the first. Facts, drama, and then the meaning of it. On facts, don't let yourself taken by all those assertive questions that the press is asking you keep cool, keep your distance. And in any case, facts and figures as such are inoffensive. That is not what the people are really, at the end of the day, interested in. Whether it's 27 victims or 38, because that were the figures that were going around, that's not making a big difference in your story. So stay on solid ground. And why do I say that? Because if you make a mistake as far as the fact is concerned, even though it may appear and can be an innocent mistake, whether it's 27 or 29, look, that doesn't change the big picture, but still they can take you on saying you lied or you made a mistake or something, and you are decredibilized. You lose your credit as an interlocutor.
I'll have to cut you off slightly because of time.
Yeah.
And move to the last question.
Sure.
Apologies, Ambassador. So from a real crisis and a coup d'etat in Central Africa and, the crisis that you mentioned in Spain to an imaginary crisis. And it's also it's an inspired question, but by someone who I cheated a bit. I asked some people and they told me, ask Leon this question. He would have a good answer. So if you had to choose today, which negotiation table would you be in the present? And be very transparent and tell us, why would you do that? Why would you do that choice?
Look, I think I enjoyed, and many people will be surprised if I say this, but I really enjoyed Libya. It was terribly tough dealing with the Libyans. Like Yemen is this kind of societies are because they are so fragmented and because their political culture has been so devastated by previous political experiences. But I think for a diplomat, the greater the challenge, the more interesting it becomes. So I think the Western Sahara problem, because it's been there for so long, and because Spain has been so involved, because I have so many friends in Morocco, in Algeria, in Mauritania, in the Western Sahara itself, that could be. And I think many of the elements I learned in Libya, and I had to use in Libya from a communications perspective, because as I told you this first time we met, you cannot be a negotiator or a mediator anymore today if you are not communicating all the time. You need to, from the outset, to set a very strong alliance with the media and work with the media. So this is this balance between secrecy or discretion when you need it in the talks, with transparency, publicity, using the media in a smart way. But with the challenge there in Libya is the same one I think I would have or anyone could have in the Western Sahara issue, which is you don't have, this is more in the case of Libya, but to some extent it happens also there. You don't have clear groups. So one of the things you have to do is to help the people who are listening in Libya to understand who is negotiating what. You didn't have two groups with clear identities. So you had to do this without polarizing the Libyan society. And this was a great challenge. And avoiding polarization is very, very important, because one of the problems any communicator has today with political communication is this polarization between the good ones and the bad ones. And the society tends to think politicians, the bad ones, the society, the good ones. And this is a critical issue. Second one, in the case of Libya, for me, it was extremely important to insist on a democratic solution for Libya. So insisting on dialogue, insisting on consensus, insisting on constitution and institutions. This was not maybe the number one interest for many of the people who were negotiating there, but for me it was critical. So to combine both and to keep this sense of where we should go. Maybe it's not where we are going today, but this is where we should go. So keeping these two levels was very important. And the third one, the pedagogic challenge. We were dealing with a society that was educated for 50, 60 years on bad communication. Gaddafi was just telling them, you have to do this because I tell you you have to do this. No critical thinkers. So we changed completely that, and we were telling them this is what is going on, these are the options, trying to be pedagogic. And I think we did reasonably well in the case of Libya, and maybe this is why we managed to make a deal in Libya. Many of these elements could be as challenging as it was in Libya in the case of the Western Sahara society, a very society that has suffered for so long. So that's probably the one I would say.
Hi, good morning. This has been a very interesting session for me. As a law enforcement officer, we always are, when we deal with crisis, we are unable to decide in a lot of times what is the priority when we deal with crisis. Is it the accuracy and transparency of the challenge we are dealing with, a crime, or as you said, a terrorist attack, because we worked with the colleagues in Catalonia during those days? Or is it stability and assuring people? If you would have to choose, Mr. Leon, what do you think should be the key priority in case of a security-related crisis when it takes place?
You have to convince the people, to reassure the people. And this reassuring is a complex concept which requires being transparent, telling them the truth, fighting fake news. Today, fake news is terrible. It's one of the aspects we had in Barcelona. What people started to say immediately, all these extreme right groups. So they are all Arabs and Muslims. They were all coming from Africa, is a migration. So all this fake news you have so one of the things that we did in Spain is to create a webpage just to react immediately and explain immediately. So it has many components, reassuring the people. But I think, today we have the advantage of technology. And it can help a lot, but it can be also very dangerous because you can have fragmentation very easily. You can have 10 communication teams working at the same time on the same issue, and then coordination becomes a challenge, because if you have the interior minister in Madrid saying something and the Catalan police in Barcelona saying something different, then it's a disaster. So coordination is one of the key elements. Transparency. There are things that will not change in communication. So the bad formulas, the usual ones, we had this guy who said we are in a hawk country. So you will all understand this very, very well. There was an expert on communication who said, in a crisis, you can be a dove, you can be a hawk. What you cannot be is an ostrich. So what I mean is that the classic formulas that never work, so silence, never work. Even discretion, never work anymore. This collapse and confession, which sometimes in the Anglo-Saxons, because you resign immediately, which is a very healthy practice in politics. But if you collapse and confess, and then you say, we did all wrong, it's a very bad formula as such. Transfer responsibility, something that politicians love. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. So the classic formulas, reassuring, showing responsibility, and being transparent, this will always work. But with extreme coordination, that's very, very important, because if you're telling them something and then you have this confusion, it will never work. Finally, final word, if I can. We're seeing more and more effective communication, but bad communication. This is Trump. So it's effective, it's very effective. You tweet 2 o'clock in the morning, next morning, 8 o'clock, everybody's talking about what you tweeted. So if I can say so, it's very important to keep the high level of politics. People need to see that you are there. There is a reason for you to be there. You are better. You have worked hard to be there, and you keep the high level of politics. Is extremely important.
Fantastic. We'll have to wrap up. Ambassador Rebecca has a flight to catch. I'm extremely honored to be with mentors that I call, and to have run that amazing session, amazing words from everybody. I have to take the chance, if you would allow me, to thank my personal mentor, Her Excellency Mona Al-Marri, for allowing us to do this session today, and who's someone I learn constantly from, specifically in crisis communication. So thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.